know me to some degree and you know that this is not my wheelhouse. I'm a musician. This stage was the stage that I learned how to improvise on, and that was why it was important for me to be here. I think I told Steve that a while ago. And so that's why it had to be here. I had to come back here to the keynote in order to do this and to present this new chapter of my life. So I've got a short meeting. I won't keep you long. It's about 10 minutes of words, and then if you've got some questions, I can answer them, probably, seeing as I'm supposed to be the expert. I'm just going to start from the beginning. I'm going to read 3 little sections, introduce 3 little characters, and yeah. Prologue. Kurt Hutchison disliked running. It had never agreed with him, even when he wasn't being pursued. He possessed none of the grace of the track stars and ball players who had emerged early in grade school, and nothing would turn him into the sturdy, masculine gazelles who ran the Potomac River trails every morning. He'd come to terms with this once high school had cleaved social circles into easily defined herds of athletes and academics. He'd embraced the latter, wearing the label of scholar as an invisible cloak that excused him from the kind of exertion he was currently experiencing. Today, there was no gym teacher half-heartedly ticking boxes beside words like satisfactory and needs improvement. Gone was his imaginary cloak, itemized with the rest of the contents of his apartment and carried away into the police van walking the street. In his place was searing pain as his lungs brushed against his ribs. Gasping, he rounded the corner, momentarily vanishing from the sights of the uniformed gazelle closing in on him. She clearly had none of his misgivings over him. "Stop!" she shouted. Okay, I lied. There's a little bit of dialogue. "Stop!" she shouted. He could not believe it. When he'd seen the yellow police tape blocking the entrance to his building and the officers scanning the sidewalk from inside of him, he'd given a moment's thought to marching straight in and demanding an explanation. A month earlier, he might have felt confident enough to do so, but his mood was different now. "I'm begging you, Hutch," his editor had said. "This isn't coming from me, it's coming from up top. Drop the contribution score. Don't publish." The alternative, presented to him on a platter of barely veiled threats, was supposed to have been enticing. An award. An award for a bunch of made-up bullshit he wouldn't even have to write. Sorry, Mom. Extolling the virtues of everything he knew was wrong. It was no alternative. "They'll bring your life down around you, Hutch. Please listen to me." He could not do this. Hearing heavy boots coming up on him, he veered off the sidewalk into traffic. A taxi screamed by and he wobbled, narrowly managing to curve out of his path. Behind him, more shouting, his name several times, followed by a threat he couldn't make out. He considered throwing his phone under the wheels of the swerving vehicles, but that wouldn't be enough. Even with it in pieces, they'd be able to get in, encryption or no. Even every contact, every email, every text, every recorded interview would be at their fingertips, and along with it, all of his sources. Informants, activists, fugitives, and insiders strewn across the globe and linked in a horrible web leading right to the phone rattling in his sweaty pocket. For some of them, it would be death. He could not do this either. Tripping up the curb, he escaped the tangle of cars immobilized behind him and threw himself toward the lower level of the shopping and entertainment complex. Pushing past the crowds of commuters filling out of the interurban station, he hurried towards the drugstore at the opposite end of the building. He could already see the line for the cashiers was at least 10 deep, and though he'd never stolen a thing in his life, today he was willing. All it would take was a lighter. Whether his hand would stop shaking long enough for him to pull the brains out of his phone, however, he wasn't sure. A siren whoop came from the entrance behind him, startling him. He looked back the way he'd come, seeing several figures in dark blue shouldering through the crowd. Another siren now, this time from the direction of the drugstore. He'd known there would be trouble if he published. Everyone, including his source, had convinced him of this. He'd heard of the harassment of journalists, the blacklisting, the tens of thousands spent battling groundless libel charges in court. But a raid on his home? Police? Arrest? He told himself he was ready, and he thought it was true. But standing there paralyzed, he realized there was no cautionary tale that could have prepared him for this. He was about to become the cautionary tale. In the midst of his panic, it took him slightly too long to realize the woman draped in flowing floral print was speaking into her sleeve. With her eyes concealed behind owlish sunglasses and most of her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, he didn't immediately realize she was watching him. It wasn't until she was within earshot that he realized he should be afraid of her. Speaking quietly into her sleeve, her lips took unmistakable shape around terrible words. Fuck him. See. The next part is 15 years later. So that was the now time. This is the near future time. Which I should mention was written 4 years ago when it was further away near time. A little bit of inception math has to be done to figure that out. Okay, 15 years later. When Germany, China, England, and America got together for their annual tea party of porcelain teeth and $70,000 cufflinks, fences went up in Washington, D.C. 20 whole blocks this time were protected from common folk, while VIPs inside posed for photo ops designed to make them look just like common folk. Somebody, somewhere must buy it, thought Skye, as she pulled the bandana over her nose, but not these folks. Near the fence, a young girl had noticed her duck into the alley, clutching her father with one hand as he roared along with the protesters. Her other hand absently waved a sign reading, "No Big Six," in RG4, which she clearly had not painted and certainly didn't understand. She was staring at Skye. More specifically, she was staring at Skye's right hand. Only kids did this. Adults would snap their eyes away, seizing upon some floating string of conversation promising to hide that they'd noticed. As the procession of ever more sophisticated prosthetics had gotten closer and closer to the real thing, the more pronounced these reactions had become, and Skye could see the little girl trying to work out just what it was that wasn't right. Deciding to help her with this, Skye reached beneath the arm of her t-shirt, pressed a release latch 6 inches below her shoulder, and let her right arm come away from her body. His little eyes grew wide, filled with terror, and skittered up to Skye's. Then they were gone, just against her father's hairy, but most certainly real, forearm. Skye's smart pen chimed in her pocket, alerting her to the time. Pulling it out, she looked down at the shimmering blue numbers glowing from the pinhead projector in the stylus's tip. Butterflies rustled through her stomach again. In 20 minutes, her life would look very different. Slipping her backpack off her shoulder, she peeled sweaty fabric away from her skin, fanning herself in the heat as she tucked farther into the shadows. Setting her bag down on a stoop, she checked over her shoulder before unzipping it. But seeing nobody, she jammed her prosthetic inside and retrieved its replacement. Nearly twice the size and 3 times as heavy, the hunk of metal ended not in a hand, but in a flat electromagnetic disc, and looked less like an end than a garbage can someone had crushed into a vaguely cylindrical car engine, which was essentially the effect she'd been going for. Nothing about it was beautiful, except what it could do. Pushing her sleeve over her shoulder, she slipped the new prosthetic in place, and with a little whine, the circuitry powered on, picking up the signals traveling between the implant and her motor cortex and those embedded under the skin of her arm. Skye cast a quick look in either direction down the alley, then lifted her arm, pointing it at the heavy metal dumpster 20 feet back the way she'd come. Clamping a fist that wasn't there, she told the magnet to fire, and with a snap, the device translated her brain signals into circuit commands. The force of the gesture yanked her off her feet, and she hit the dumpster with a bang. Releasing her grip, she stumbled away. Pointing her arm again, she tried gentler pressure, feeling the magnet grow stronger and weaker with the movement of her non-existent right hand. From the direction of the street, a low rumble grew audible, and seconds later, a train shot past, 30 feet over the heads of the protesters, drowning out their voices. 10 minutes. One more character. The first interaction Richard had with his daughter was in a dream, 6 months before she was born. There, exercised in his subconscious, she hummed a lima bean the size of a dining room table, fibers of dark skin pulsing where her eyes should have been. The music had been too loud and he'd never figured out what that had meant, though Alec had offered several unconvincing theories while trying to calm him down. When he put enough effort into it, he managed to push the lingering hangover of the dream out of his mind. But every so often, as he witnessed his wife's ballooning belly distorting both her posture and her mood, he wondered about odds. He just looked like lima beans for a while, but he looked it up. They looked like lima beans right until they looked like salamanders. And after salamanders, he didn't like thinking about it because he worried too much about the tiny, breakable paw hands and the brains that looked like they could just spill out into the clear liquid, somehow filling his wife. Surely the odds guaranteed that one child somewhere, at some point in time, would simply grow into a giant lima bean, forever incapable of seeing or moving or speaking or listening to music at reasonable levels. What if he had put this lima bean inside his wife? What if his dream had been a premonition? Allie could break these thoughts. Passing a hand in front of his eyes, she'd tell him he was making that face again, and he would lock the lima bean back up in some less confusing corner of his brain, marveling at how he could simultaneously be so proud and terrified of the same thing. It wasn't until Ali's final howl of labor had blended with the screaming of a tiny baby-shaped girl he'd been presented that he believed maybe, just maybe, he'd finally done something normal. Skylar Point had made sure he didn't believe this about her for long. I think that's what's done at this point. No questions is also fine. So basically, Louise.
What was your inspiration for this book?
Thank you for that interesting question, Louise. I actually have notes about that. We're telepathic. So I have 3 beautiful nieces who, all of whom are sort of exiting their education or exiting part of their education, moving into deciding what they actually want to do with their lives. And it's impossible for me to not notice how much harder it is for them to find their career paths than it was for me. And I'm not that far separated from them in age. The oldest one is 13 years younger than I am, 13, 14 years younger than I am. And her mother is 14 years older than I am, so I'm smack in the middle of between my sister and her children. And it's so hard for them to find work opportunities. I have a friend here who I've known for 20 years. She was at my first job, Joanne, and none of the jobs that we did at that photo studio back then exist anymore. I can't think of a single one that still actually takes place. And a lot of the other jobs that people had in that environment also don't exist. And so those were entry level right out of high school. At that point, I didn't have any violin education provided by Nancy DeNovo sitting over there. So yeah, it was, it says on the cover another name, Jesse Life, which is obviously a pseudonym, but he's a very close friend of mine who we were very closely on this book for years and years and years. And basically, this is the product of thousands and thousands of hours of conversation, some of which included questions like, how are your nieces? And sometimes the answer to that was, well, it's tough to find an interesting job. And so that led to conversations about automation and how that's going to affect employment and opportunities for young people, and what do we do with that situation? How is it shaping our world now? And so that's basically what the book is about. And so it takes place in the near future because it's an exploration of how the systems we have in place are going to maybe either help in some situations or hurt in others. And yeah, so that's where the sci-fi comes from, but the rest of it is not so much sci-fi, I guess.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
Your original vision of this story, is it very different from the end result?
You know, it's not really, but that's entirely testament to Jesse. So I love to work from an outline. I'm not a super organized person, as this person in life can attest to. But when I'm working on creative things, I like to do really box in. I like to know step by step what's happening. And he insisted, swore up and down that he would not do this unless we totally abandoned the outline idea. And this caused me no end of stress. But it, weirdly enough, it actually kept me on point much more than working with an outline did. So I think some elements changed. I had to, I painted myself into a corner and I had to unpaint myself and then stuff back in. But it stayed pretty true to what we were trying to answer. The question we're trying to answer, it says in the trailer, which I know a lot of you have seen, is what happens to a society when human labor is no longer necessary? And yeah, so we stuck with that question, and I think the result, I don't know, felt inevitable.
Okay, cool.
I've only read the book order, so perhaps the answer is self-evident in the book. But why did you set it in the United States?
Okay, that's a good question. Basically, I feel as a Canadian that it's very difficult to see real change happen unless it happens at the top of the food chain. And I see the States as being there, and their choices affect us and they affect other countries. And so in some ways it would have made more sense to set it here because contextually I have more material to work with, and I have never been to Washington, D.C. I feel like I have though through Google Maps now, which a lot of you actually can't see above Washington DC because they block it off, which I thought was pretty interesting. Yeah, so I felt I had to set it where the decision for me.
Zoe, do you think anyone will still play the violin in 100 years?
Yes. Yes, there are many other people.
How long was the writing process?
The writing process was actually pretty, like, to get the first draft done, I think I did it in 9 months or so. I'm kind of an obsessive worker, so I like to just drive right through it. And then the waiting began. And I know I've told some of you this, but as a musician, you know, you can adapt your performance to the reaction of the audience in real time, and that's a real privilege that I never knew existed until I sent out that book and just waited. Yeah. So altogether, from the idea, that first initial conversation where we said, hey, let's write a book, to now, it's just over 4 years. Yep.
I'm a hard copy kind of person, but for those that like Kindle and editor also available electronic.
It is. Yeah. It's Kindle and it's also EPUB and various other technology bookings. Yeah.
Is there an audiobook version of your book?
It's coming. I was hoping that it would be released. It's been recorded and I think it's in the editing and vetting process. I don't remember the name. Sorry?
Somebody that
Patrick Stewart.
It was a big secret and it's not that. It's an actress. Okay, so Randy.
Are any of the characters following
Okay, funny story. So Genevieve and I had just started playing in quartet together, and her name popped up on Facebook. I friended her, or she friended me, and her last name is Malachi. I pronounced it right. And I thought, oh, that's a cool name. It's about French. And so I was naming the characters at that point. I thought, oh, I'll make this character so and so Malachi. And I just kind of liked it, and it stuck. And every time I would see Genevieve, which was quite often, I would think, oh, I should probably mention that. And then she got her book yesterday and she posted on Facebook, hey, you named your character after me. Or not quite that. And so, yeah, kind of. I'm kind of in all the characters, so it's a totally self-centered book.